For centuries, a single piece of linen has captivated believers, scientists, and skeptics alike. Its secrets hidden in plain sight. The Shroud of Turin, a fragile cloth bearing the faint, haunting image of a crucified man, has sparked debates that stretch across continents and generations. Could this really be the burial shroud of Jesus Christ himself, or is it an elaborate medieval forgery crafted to deceive the faithful? The truth, as you're about to discover, is far more mysterious than anyone expected. What makes this relic so extraordinary isn't just the eerie, almost photographic imprint of a human figure. It's the fact that no one has ever been able to fully explain how that image was created. Modern science, with all its advanced tools, still struggles to replicate it. The shroud's fibers contain traces of blood that match the wounds described in biblical accounts of Christ's crucifixion. Yet carbon dating tests in the 1980s suggested it originated in the Middle Ages. But here's where things get even stranger. Later research revealed potential flaws in those tests, leaving the door wide open to doubt. Could the shroud truly be 2,000 years old? And if so, how did an ancient artifact survive wars, fires, and the passage of time so perfectly intact? This isn't just a story about a piece of cloth. It's a journey into one of history's greatest enigmas. From the depths of medieval churches to cutting-edge laboratories, the Shroud of Turin has defied explanation at every turn. Some see it as divine proof, others as an unsolved puzzle of human ingenuity. But no matter where you stand, one thing is undeniable. The shroud holds secrets that challenge our understanding of history, science, and faith itself. So let's unravel its mysteries together, piece by piece, clue by clue, and discover why, after all this time, the Shroud of Turin continues to haunt our imagination. The story of the Shroud of Turin takes a dramatic turn in the mid-14th century, when it suddenly appears in the historical record, almost as if it materialized out of thin air. In 1354, a French knight named Geoffroy de Charny is said to have placed the mysterious linen in a church at Liry, a small town in northeastern France. But here's the baffling part: there are no written accounts, no mentions in historical texts, no whispers of its existence before this moment. So where had it been for over 1,300 years since the crucifixion? Some believe early Christians may have hidden it to protect it from destruction during periods of persecution. Others speculate it was smuggled out of Constantinople after the city was sacked by Crusaders in 1204. There's even a theory that it was secretly passed down through the Knights Templar, who revered it as a sacred relic before their sudden downfall. But without concrete evidence, these remain tantalizing guesses. What makes de Charny's possession of the shroud even more intriguing is that he never revealed how he came to own it. Was it a gift, a treasure seized in battle? Or did it simply fall into his hands through some twist of fate? The absence of documentation before 1354 only deepens the enigma, leaving historians to piece together fragments of possibility. One thing is certain: its sudden appearance in medieval France marks the beginning of a controversy that still burns bright today. And as we'll soon see, this was only the first chapter in the shroud's long, winding journey through history. The most mind-bending aspect of the Shroud of Turin isn't just what we see, it's how we see it. When amateur photographer Secondo Pia first captured the shroud's image in 1898, the photographic plate revealed something astonishing. The faint markings on the linen weren't just a simple stain or painting. They behaved like a perfect photographic negative, revealing an incredibly detailed, lifelike portrait when developed. Think about that for a moment. Centuries before the invention of photography, someone or something created an image that only made sense when viewed through modern technology. Even more perplexing, scientists have confirmed the image isn't painted. No pigments, no brushstrokes, no signs of directionality that would betray an artist's hand. The coloration exists only on the very topmost fibers of the cloth, less than a micron deep, as if the image was somehow projected onto the surface without any physical contact. Modern attempts to recreate this effect using lasers, radiation, or chemical vapors have come close, but none perfectly match the shroud's unique properties. How could a medieval forger have achieved something that still stumps today's most advanced technology? Here's where it gets even stranger. The shroud's image contains encoded three-dimensional information, something no painting or artistic technique from that era could replicate. When researchers used advanced image processing software to analyze the shading, they discovered the darkness of each thread corresponds precisely to the distance between the cloth and a hypothetical human body. In other words, the shroud doesn't just show a face, it behaves like a topographical map of a real person's contours. This level of precision suggests an interaction between the cloth and an actual human form, but one that left no traces of decomposition or decay. Medieval artists, no matter how skilled, had no concept of photographic negatives or three-dimensional encoding. They worked with brushes, pigments, and the limitations of their time. So if the shroud isn't a painting, what created that image? Radiation from a miraculous event, a chemical reaction from a body wrapped in burial spices, or something science hasn't even discovered yet? The answers remain as elusive as the image itself, etched into those fragile fibers with a precision that defies explanation. One of the most chilling details on the Shroud of Turin isn't the faint image, it's the dark, rust-colored stains that trace the outline of a brutal crucifixion. Forensic experts who have studied these markings have identified them as human blood, specifically type AB, with traces of bilirubin, a compound that builds up in the body after severe trauma. The patterns match the wounds described in the Gospels: scourge marks from Roman flagrums across the back, puncture wounds around the scalp consistent with a crown of thorns, even a deep gash near the ribcage where a spear might have struck. But here's the unsettling question: how could a medieval forger have known to include these precise medical details centuries before modern forensic science? Researchers using spectroscopy and microscopic analysis confirmed the presence of hemoglobin and other blood components, ruling out common medieval pigments like iron oxide or vermilion. Even more compelling, the blood flows follow gravity exactly as they would on a real body, dripping from the wrists, not the palms, as often depicted in medieval art, since crucifixion nails would have been driven between forearm bones to support weight. Some stains even show serum halos, a telltale separation of blood and plasma that occurs post-mortem. These aren't artistic flourishes, they're forensic fingerprints of real suffering. Yet skeptics argue it's all an elaborate hoax. They point to a 2014 study where an artist allegedly recreated similar bloodstains using medieval techniques, mixing pigments with actual blood for authenticity. But here's the problem: those recreations lack the biochemical markers found on the shroud, like high bilirubin levels indicative of torture. Plus, medieval artists had no reason to mimic serum separation or precise wound patterns unseen beneath clothing. If it's a forgery, it's one that somehow predicted modern forensic discoveries by accident. The debate grows even more complex when you examine the spear wound. The shroud shows a sharp, elliptical bloodstain near the fifth rib, matching the Gospel of John's account. But forensic pathologists note something eerie. The flow pattern suggests the body was in a vertical position when wounded, yet the stain on the cloth implies it was laid flat shortly after. This level of physiological accuracy would have required an impossibly detailed understanding of post-crucifixion blood dynamics in the 1400s. So what's the verdict? The blood on the shroud either belongs to a crucified man from antiquity, one whose wounds align perfectly with biblical accounts, or it's the work of a forger with knowledge centuries ahead of their time. Neither explanation sits comfortably, leaving us with a mystery written not in ink or paint, but in the very substance of life itself. In 1988, the Shroud of Turin became the center of a firestorm when scientists announced the shocking results of carbon dating tests, placing its origin squarely in the Middle Ages between 1260 and 1390 AD. For skeptics, this was definitive proof the shroud was a medieval forgery. But beneath the surface, the story was far from settled. The tests themselves became embroiled in controversy, with glaring questions about methodology and possible errors that would haunt the scientific community for decades. First, consider the sampling process. The tiny fragment used for carbon dating was taken from a single corner of the shroud, a section experts now suspect might have been part of a medieval repair. Historical records reveal the cloth survived a devastating fire in 1532, when molten silver from its display case scorched through layers, requiring nuns to painstakingly patch damaged areas. Could the tested fibers have been contaminated by soot, smoke, or even the repair threads themselves? Later microscopic analysis revealed exactly that, a patchwork of newer threads interwoven with ancient ones, invisible to the naked eye. If scientists accidentally dated a repaired section rather than the original fabric, the results would be catastrophically skewed. Then there's the issue of cellulose degradation. A groundbreaking 2005 study published in the journal Thermochimica Acta found that the shroud's fibers show chemical signatures consistent with exposure to extreme heat, the same fire from 1532. When linen overheats, its molecular structure changes, making it appear younger under carbon dating. Researchers demonstrated this by heating ancient linen samples, which then gave falsely modern dates in subsequent tests. Suddenly, the carbon dating's medieval result looked less like a verdict and more like a red flag pointing to overlooked variables. But the most startling twist came in 2013, when statisticians re-examined the raw data from the 1988 tests. They discovered something the original team missed: the samples weren't uniform. Some sections of the tested fragment dated much older, while others aligned with the medieval timeline. This inconsistency suggested the shroud might be a blend of ancient and medieval materials, further muddying the waters. Meanwhile, alternative dating methods like vibrational spectroscopy and mechanical tests for fiber aging have since pointed to a far older origin, some estimates stretching back to the 1st century. So where does this leave us? The carbon dating results that once seemed so conclusive now stand on shaky ground, challenged by mounting evidence of contamination, sampling errors, and overlooked historical context. What began as a simple scientific test unraveled into a labyrinth of questions, proving that when it comes to the Shroud of Turin, even the most cutting-edge technology can't erase centuries of mystery. If anything, the controversy only deepened the enigma, leaving us to wonder whether science, in its rush for answers, might have missed the bigger picture. The mystery of the Shroud of Turin takes an unexpected turn when we zoom in not on the image itself, but on something almost invisible to the naked eye: pollen grains clinging to its ancient fibers. In the 1970s, Swiss criminologist Max Frey made headlines when he claimed to have identified dozens of plant species embedded in the cloth, many native to a very specific region, the area around Jerusalem. His findings suggested the shroud had spent time in the exact location where Jesus was crucified, buried, and, according to scripture, resurrected. Frey's analysis revealed pollen from plants like Gundelia tournefortii, a thorny desert shrub found in the Judean wilderness, and Zygophyllum dumosum, a resilient species that grows near the Dead Sea. Even more striking, he detected traces of pollen from extinct species that hadn't grown in the region for centuries, plants that would have been impossible for a medieval forger to know about, let alone replicate. These tiny botanical clues seem to stitch the shroud story directly into the landscape of ancient Judea, but skeptics were quick to challenge Frey's work. They argued that pollen is easily transported by wind, trade routes, or even later handling, making it unreliable as evidence. Some questioned whether the samples Frey collected were truly embedded in the fibers or merely settled on the surface over centuries of exposure. One critic pointed out that Frey had also identified pollen from plants native to Constantinople and Europe, suggesting the shroud could have picked up these traces during its documented journey through medieval churches. Yet there's a twist that keeps this debate alive. In 2005, botanist Avenome Dannen re-examined Frey's samples and made a startling observation. The combination of pollen types on the shroud matched a unique ecological fingerprint, one only found in a narrow corridor between Jerusalem and the Dead Sea. Even more compelling, Dannen identified microscopic traces of travertine limestone dust on the cloth, a mineral specific to Jerusalem's ancient tombs. This wasn't just random contamination, it was a geographic signature, as if the shroud had physically brushed against the stones of 1st century Judea. So where does this leave us? If the pollen evidence is accurate, it paints a vivid picture of the shroud's journey, from the arid hills outside Jerusalem to the hands of medieval knights. But if it's mere contamination, the coincidence is staggering. How could airborne pollen alone account for such a precise blend of Middle Eastern flora, including species unknown to science until centuries later? Whether you see this as proof or puzzle, one thing is clear: these tiny, ancient grains hold secrets that refuse to be brushed aside. The story of the Shroud of Turin grows even more compelling when another ancient relic enters the picture. The Sudarium of Oviedo, a small linen cloth kept in a Spanish cathedral since the 8th century. Tradition claims this was the face cloth mentioned in the Gospel of John, used to cover Jesus' head after his death. At first glance, it's just a stained piece of fabric, but when scientists compared it to the Shroud of Turin, the similarities sent shockwaves through the research community. Both cloths bear type AB blood, a rare group in medieval Europe but more common in the Middle East, and forensic analysis shows the stains align perfectly with the wounds depicted on the shroud. The Sudarium's blood patterns suggest it was wrapped around the head of a man with facial injuries, positioned atop the crucified man's face while blood was still flowing. Even more startling, the puncture marks match the crown of thorns depicted on the shroud, and the nasal stains correspond to the exact angle of a head tilting forward in death. It's as if these two linens touched the same person at different moments of the same tragedy. But here's what makes the Sudarium especially significant: its historical paper trail is far clearer than the shroud's. Records place it in Spain by the 7th century, with earlier mentions tracing it from Jerusalem to Alexandria, then through North Africa during the Muslim conquests. Unlike the shroud, which appears mysteriously in the 1300s, the Sudarium's journey is meticulously documented centuries earlier. If these two cloths are connected, it undermines claims that the shroud is a medieval creation. The most damning evidence for skeptics: a DNA study in 2014 found genetic material on both cloths matching a haplogroup most common among Sephardic Jews and Middle Eastern populations. The odds of two separate medieval forgeries accidentally sharing these biological markers along with matching blood types, wound patterns, and historical context are astronomically low. Yet, as always, mysteries remain. Some researchers argue the Sudarium stains could belong to any crucified individual, not necessarily the biblical Jesus. Others question whether the two relics were ever in contact at all, but the sheer weight of coincidences is staggering. Two ancient cloths separated by geography and centuries of history, telling what appears to be the same brutal story. Whether divine or deeply human, their connection weaves another thread into a puzzle that refuses to be unraveled. Secondo Pia never expected his simple photographic experiment would rewrite history. In 1898, the Italian amateur was given rare permission to photograph the Shroud of Turin during a public exhibition in Turin's cathedral. Working in the dim candlelight, he set up his bulky camera equipment, carefully positioning the glass plates that would capture the ancient relic. When he developed the negatives later that night, his hands must have trembled at what emerged. The faint, ghostly markings on the linen, barely visible to the naked-eyed trance, formed into a startlingly clear, lifelike portrait in the photographic negative. Instead of the usual reversal of light and shadow, the shroud's image revealed an intricately detailed face with three-dimensional depth, as if the cloth itself was a 2,000-year-old photograph waiting to be decoded. The implications were earth-shattering. Medieval artists worked with pigments and brushes, creating images meant to be viewed directly. The concept of a photographic negative where light and dark areas invert to reveal hidden details was centuries beyond their imagination. No forger in the 1300s or 1400s could have anticipated that future technology would unlock their creation's true form. Yet here was the shroud, behaving like a precise negative image centuries before photography existed. The discovery sent shockwaves through scientific and religious communities alike. How could an ancient artifact contain properties that only made sense through modern technology? Experts who examined Pierre's photographs noticed something even more perplexing. The image tonal gradients weren't random. They corresponded perfectly to the distance between the cloth and a human body. Darker areas matched where the fabric would have touched skin, the nose, forehead, and hands, while lighter shades showed where it draped loosely. This wasn't just an artistic rendering, it was a scientific encoding of spatial data, something no medieval painter could have conceived, let alone executed. Even today, attempts to recreate this effect using advanced projection techniques fall short of the shroud's inexplicable precision. Critics scrambled for explanations. Some suggested the image resulted from a natural chemical reaction between the linen and a corpse's vapors. Others proposed radiation or energy bursts from a miraculous resurrection event. But none could fully account for the negative's photographic quality or its perfect alignment with three-dimensional anatomy. The more scientists studied Pierre's revelation, the clearer it became. The shroud's image wasn't painted, stamped, or scorched. It was, by all appearances, a literal imprint of a human form, captured through means we still don't understand. What began as a simple photography experiment became the cornerstone of modern shroud research. Pierre's accidental discovery forced the world to confront an uncomfortable truth. The Shroud of Turin defies every historical and scientific category we try to place it in. Whether divine or inexplicably advanced, its secrets are woven into the very fibers, waiting for the next breakthrough to shed light on this ancient enigma. The discovery of three-dimensional data encoded in the Shroud of Turin's image sent shockwaves through the scientific community, challenging everything we thought we knew about ancient artifacts. In the 1970s, NASA scientists took a tool designed for analyzing planetary terrain, the VP8 image analyzer, and pointed it at an object much closer to home. What they found defied logic. The shroud's faint markings contained precise depth information, mapping the contours of a human body as if the cloth had once draped over a real three-dimensional form. Unlike paintings or drawings, which flatten three-dimensional subjects into two dimensions, the shroud's image behaved like a topographical map, with shading variations corresponding exactly to the distance between the fabric and hypothetical bodily features. Skeptics scrambled for explanations. One theory suggested the image could have been created using a bas-relief technique, pressing linen over a sculpted form and applying pigment. But when researchers tried replicating this method, the results fell glaringly short. Bas-relief rubbings produce distortions where the cloth bends around edges, yet the shroud's image shows no such warping. Even more puzzling, the VP8 revealed subtle anatomical details no medieval artist would have known to include, like the precise positioning of thumbs tucked into palms, a natural reflex when nails pierce the median nerve during crucifixion. These aren't artistic choices, they're involuntary physiological responses invisibly encoded in the fabric. proponents of the shroud's authenticity highlight another impossibility: the image's perfect alignment with first-century burial customs. Jewish tradition required a body to be washed before wrapping, yet the shroud shows clear bloodstains. This implies the image formed before any cleansing could occur, preserving post-mortem evidence exactly as described in the Gospels. Modern attempts to recreate the image using radiation, chemical vapors, or even supernatural hypotheses like divine light have yielded similar visual effects, but none replicate the shroud's combination of photographic negative properties, three-dimensional data, and forensic accuracy. The debate intensifies when you consider the VP8's most baffling revelation: the image contains no directional brushstrokes or tool marks. It's as if the figure appeared through a momentary burst of energy, scorching the fibers uniformly from all angles. Even today, with advanced nanotechnology, we lack a method to project a perfect three-dimensional likeness onto linen without physical contact. Whether divine intervention or lost ancient technology, the shroud's depth encoding remains a silent challenge to our understanding of history, art, and science itself. A riddle wrapped in a mystery, pressed into fragile threads that refuse to surrender their secrets. The year 1532 marked a turning point for the Shroud of Turin, not through discovery but through near destruction. On the night of December 4th, flames tore through the Sainte-Chapelle in Chambéry, France, where the precious relic was kept. As the fire raged, molten silver from its protective case dripped onto the folded linen, scorching through layers and leaving a haunting pattern of symmetrical burns. These distinctive triangular marks remain visible today, a stark reminder of how close history came to losing one of its most enigmatic artifacts forever. But the fire's true legacy might lie in what happened next. Poor Clare nuns, tasked with preserving the damaged shroud, meticulously stitched reinforcements onto its charred edges and placed a backing cloth to stabilize it. At the time, their work was seen as an act of devotion. Centuries later, however, researchers would question whether these repairs unknowingly sabotaged future attempts to unravel the shroud's age. The patches, blended seamlessly with original threads, were invisible to the naked eye, until advanced imaging techniques in the 21st century revealed a startling possibility. The very act of saving the shroud may have contaminated it. Fast forward to 2022, when a team of textile conservators made a breakthrough. Using high-resolution microscopy, they identified sections of the shroud's border woven with a different twist pattern, a telltale sign of medieval repair threads interspersed with ancient ones. Even more damning for past carbon dating efforts, the patches contained cotton fibers, a material absent from the original first-century style linen. If the 1988 carbon dating samples included these newer threads, the results would have been skewed toward the Middle Ages by default. The implications are profound. Imagine testing a 2,000-year-old manuscript that had missing pages restored in the 1400s, only to declare the entire text a medieval forgery based on those later additions. That's essentially what critics argue happened with the shroud. The fire didn't just leave physical scars, it created a perfect storm of confusion, blending timelines in a way that still divides scientists today. Whether accidental or providential, the Chambéry fire ensured the shroud's secrets would remain guarded, at least until technology could catch up to its tangled history. The claim that the Shroud of Turin is nothing more than an elaborate medieval painting took center stage in the 1970s, thanks to the work of microscopist Walter Macrone. Armed with his trusty microscope, Macrone analyzed tiny samples from the shroud and announced a bombshell discovery: particles of iron oxide, a common pigment in medieval paint. To him, this was incontrovertible proof that the image had been painstakingly crafted by human hands, likely using a technique called grisaille, where artists mixed iron oxide with gelatin to create lifelike monochrome images. For skeptics, Macrone's findings were the smoking gun they'd been waiting for: finally debunking the shroud as an ingenious but undeniable forgery. But here's where the story twists. The Shroud of Turin research project, or STURP, a team of top-tier scientists from NASA, Los Alamos, and other prestigious institutions, dug deeper. Their exhaustive analysis, using tools far more advanced than Macron's microscope, revealed something startling. While iron oxide particles were indeed present, they weren't concentrated in the image areas as you'd expect with a painting. Instead, they were scattered uniformly across the cloth, consistent with the natural oxidation of linen fibers over centuries. Even more damning for the paint theory, STURP ultraviolet scans and chemical tests found zero traces of binder, no gelatin, no egg tempera, no medium whatsoever to hold pigment to the fabric. Paint needs glue, the shroud had none. Then there's the problem of the image itself. Medieval artists, no matter how skilled, worked within the limits of their era's knowledge. Yet the shroud's image captures details no painter of the time could have known, like the precise angle of blood flows from a crucified body, or the way scourge marks disappear beneath bloodstains, indicating wounds inflicted before death. These aren't artistic flourishes, they're forensic realities, invisible unless you understand crucifixion as a modern pathologist would. Even Macron himself admitted his theory couldn't explain the image's three-dimensional encoding or its haunting photographic negative properties. Perhaps the most compelling counterargument comes from the countless attempts to replicate the shroud. Artists, chemists, and even forensic specialists have tried using everything from powdered pigments to acidic vapors, yet no one has ever matched its unique combination of superficial fiber staining, lack of brushstrokes, and perfect anatomical precision. The closest anyone came was in 2009, when an Italian scientist used ultraviolet light to create a faint image on linen. But even that required technology unavailable in the Middle Ages and still failed to capture the shroud's depth of detail. So where does this leave us? Macron's iron oxide might explain some discoloration, but it falls far short of accounting for the shroud's full complexity. STURP's conclusion was unequivocal. No artistic technique known to medieval Europe or even modern science can satisfactorily explain how the image was formed. Whether divine or otherwise, the shroud remains a canvas with no brush, a masterpiece without a painter, its origins still shrouded in questions no microscope can fully resolve. Just when researchers thought the Shroud of Turin couldn't get any more mysterious, a discovery in 2002 turned everything upside down literally. Scientists examining the backside of the linen, hidden for centuries beneath a reinforcing cloth, stumbled upon something no one expected, a faint secondary image of a face mirroring the one on the front. This wasn't just a smudge or a shadow. It was a precise, albeit fainter, imprint of the same haunting visage, complete with the same wounds and contours. The kicker, this hidden image was completely invisible from the front, detectable only through modern imaging technology. Think about what this means for the forgery debate. If a medieval artist had painted the shroud, why would they waste time meticulously replicating details on the back, details no one would ever see, especially when the reinforcing cloth sewn on in the 1500s would have obscured it entirely? The very existence of this second image defies the logic of human deception. No forger, no matter how skilled or devout, would go to such lengths to hide their handiwork. It'd be like crafting an elaborate fresco on the back of a cathedral wall, knowing it would be covered by stone for eternity. Even more baffling is how the image transferred. The backside imprint isn't a mirror reflection, it's offset, as if the fabric absorbed the likeness from both sides of a three-dimensional form. Modern experiments show this could only happen if the cloth was loosely draped over a body, allowing minimal contact where the fabric touched skin. But here's the twist, the bloodstains on the backside don't match the front. Instead of showing seepage from wounds, they appear as direct contact transfers, suggesting the shroud was wrapped around a body just long enough to capture an imprint before being removed. This level of forensic consistency is something no medieval painter could have calculated. Skeptics argue that chemical reactions or moisture might have caused the reverse image, but that ignores the precision of the alignment. The two faces match down to the subtlest contours, something accidental seepage couldn't achieve. Others suggest the image might have bled through over time, yet the shroud's tight weave and the absence of pigment make that impossible. The only plausible explanation, the image formed through a brief, intense interaction between the cloth and a physical body, leaving its mark on both sides in a way that transcends artistic or natural processes. This hidden double image does more than deepen the mystery. It shatters the very framework we use to understand the shroud. Whether divine or inexplicable, it stands as a silent rebuke to simple explanations, proving that even after centuries of scrutiny, the Shroud of Turin still holds secrets we've only begun to uncover. What if the mysterious image on the Shroud of Turin wasn't formed by human hands at all, but by a blinding flash of light? Dr. John Jackson, a physicist who once led NASA's Shroud of Turin research project, proposed a radical theory. He suggested that a sudden burst of vacuum ultraviolet radiation, a type of light so intense it's rarely found outside laboratory conditions, could have scorched the linen's outermost fibers, creating that eerie, photo-like imprint. The science behind this idea is startlingly precise. Unlike normal light, vacuum UV can't travel far through air, meaning it would only affect the topmost threads of the cloth, exactly as we see on the shroud. Even more compelling, this radiation could explain the image's three-dimensional encoding. If the light originated from within a wrapped body, brighter areas would correspond to closer contact with the fabric, while fainter patches would show where the cloth draped loosely, matching the shroud's uncanny depth effects perfectly. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Jackson's hypothesis connects to something far older than modern science, ancient descriptions of the resurrection itself. The Gospels describe Jesus' burial linens left behind in the tomb, with witnesses reporting a dazzling light so intense it knocked guards to the ground. Could that light have been more than metaphorical? If vacuum UV radiation emanated from the body at the moment of resurrection, it wouldn't just create an image, it would vaporize the molecular bonds on the cloth's surface without burning it, leaving behind the ghostly negative we see today. It's a theory that bridges faith and physics in a way few others dare to attempt. Skeptics, of course, have alternative explanations. Some propose that static electricity generated as the shroud was pulled from a body could have discharged onto the fabric, chemically altering its fibers. Others argue microbial decay might have played a role, with bacteria or fungi subtly bleaching the linen over time. But these theories stumble when confronted with the shroud's finer details. Electrostatic discharges would create chaotic patterns, not the anatomically perfect image we observe. Microbial decay, meanwhile, can't account for the bloodstains remaining untouched while the image formed, nor does it explain why no other ancient burial cloth shows similar markings. Jackson's radiation hypothesis has its own challenges. No known natural phenomenon produces vacuum UV in the precise, controlled manner needed to create the shroud's image. And while modern lasers can produce similar effects in labs, replicating the entire process at scale remains impossible. Yet the theory lingers because it answers questions others can't: how the image lacks directionality, why no pigments are present, and how three-dimensional data could be encoded without physical contact. Whether divine or inexplicably scientific, the idea forces us to confront a possibility far beyond medieval artistry, that the shroud's mystery might stem from an event so extraordinary it defies the boundaries of our understanding. The 2018 DNA study of the Shroud of Turin added another layer of intrigue when scientists discovered genetic traces from plants spanning 3 continents: Jerusalem, India, and Europe. Hidden within the linen's fibers were microscopic fragments of DNA matching species like Pistacia lentiscus, a shrub native to the Middle East whose resin was used in ancient Jewish burial rites, and Gossypium herbaceum, a cotton variety cultivated in India's Indus Valley as early as 5000 BC. For researchers, these findings traced a potential journey far more expansive than previously imagined, suggesting the cloth could have passed through trade routes connecting the Mediterranean to South Asia. Yet the study ignited fierce debate almost immediately. Critics pointed out that human handling over centuries, especially during medieval veneration when the shroud was frequently unfolded, touched, and even kissed by pilgrims, could have introduced foreign DNA through secondary contact. Even airborne pollen or dust from distant locales might have settled onto the fabric during public exhibitions. Some scientists argued these genetic traces were meaningless contamination, like forensic noise in an already crowded crime scene. But proponents countered with a compelling detail: the geographic distribution wasn't random. The plant DNA clustered in patterns that aligned with historical events. Middle Eastern species near bloodstained areas consistent with burial in Jerusalem. Indian cotton along folded edges hinting at storage or transport through trade hubs, and European flora concentrated near the patches sewn on after the 1532 fire. This wasn't haphazard debris. It resembled a genetic itinerary, quietly recording the shroud's hypothetical journey from 1st century Judea to medieval Europe via Silk Road merchants or Crusader loot. The most tantalizing clue emerged when researchers compared the shroud's plant DNA to other ancient textiles. While most burial cloths from the same era showed contamination limited to their region of origin, the shroud stood out for its global mosaic of genetic material. Even the act of weaving couldn't explain this. Linen production in antiquity typically involved localized materials. Unless the shroud was deliberately exposed to diverse environments over centuries, its genetic diversity seemed almost intentional. Skeptics remained unmoved. One geneticist compared the study to reading tea leaves, arguing that without knowing when or how these DNA fragments were deposited, their significance was purely speculative. Others noted that medieval reliquaries often contained fabric samples from multiple holy sites, artificially blending geographic markers. But here's what keeps the debate alive: the Indian cotton. If the shroud was purely a medieval European creation, why would its DNA profile echo trade networks from antiquity, long before the Crusades opened East-West exchanges? Whether evidence of travel or accidental contamination, these genetic whispers remind us that the shroud story is written not just in blood and image, but in the silent language of pollen and plant cells. Each new study peels back another layer, revealing not answers but deeper, more tangled questions. Among the many perplexing details on the Shroud of Turin, two faint circular markings near the eye sockets have sparked a theory as curious as it is compelling. Could these be the ghostly imprints of ancient coins placed over the eyes of the deceased? The idea stems from an obscure 1st century Jewish burial custom where small coins called leptons, minted during Pontius Pilate's reign, were sometimes placed on the eyelids of the dead. Proponents of this theory point to numismatic studies that appear to identify the blurred shapes as Pilate-era widow's mites, tiny bronze coins bearing symbols like a litus, a crooked staff used by Roman priests, or a simpulum, a sacrificial cup. When researchers superimposed high-resolution images of these coins onto the shroud's markings, the alignment seemed eerily precise, down to the placement of decorative dots along the edges. But skeptics counter with a simple yet powerful argument: pareidolia, the human tendency to see familiar patterns in random shapes. They argue that the faint discolorations could just as easily be sweat stains, fabric folds, or even damage from the 1532 fire. Numismatist Alan Wanger, who championed the coin theory in the 1980s, used a technique called polarized image overlay to match the shroud's marks to specific coin types, even identifying what he believed was the Greek letters eukai from the coin's legend, Tiberiu Caesaros, faintly impressed on the cloth. Yet critics, including the British Museum's coin experts, dismiss these interpretations as wishful thinking, noting that no other burial shroud from antiquity, including ones found with coins still in place, shows similar numismatic imprints. The debate takes a fascinating turn when you consider the physics involved. Coins placed on eyelids would have rested against skin, not directly touching the shroud. For an image to transfer, the cloth would have needed to press firmly against the coin, something unlikely in a traditional Jewish burial where linens were draped loosely. Even if contact occurred, the faintness and uniformity of the markings don't match what you'd expect from metal pressing into fabric. Modern experiments pressing coins onto linen produce stark, sharp outlines, nothing like the shroud's subtle, diffuse circles. Yet the theory refuses to fade entirely. Some researchers suggest a middle ground, perhaps the coins left indirect traces through chemical interactions. If the body emitted vapors during decomposition, bronze coins might have acted as catalysts, altering the way those gases interacted with the cloth. Others propose the markings represent not coins, but ritual anointing oils that pooled around the eyes, creating organic discolorations that coincidentally resemble ancient currency. What makes this controversy so captivating isn't just the question of whether coins were present, but what their presence would imply. If authentic, these faint circles could tether the shroud's origin to Pilate's Judea with startling specificity, offering a timestamp no carbon dating could match. But until someone unearths a 1st century burial shroud with unambiguous coin impressions, this theory will remain suspended between tantalizing possibility and the limits of human perception, a numismatic Rorschach test hidden in plain sight. For over 4 centuries, a protective backing cloth hid the reverse side of the Shroud of Turin from scrutiny, until a secretive Vatican-sanctioned restoration in 2002 changed everything. In a carefully orchestrated operation, textile experts painstakingly removed the 16th century Holland cloth that had been stitched to the shroud after the Chambéry fire. What they uncovered beneath sent shockwaves through the scientific community. A previously unknown secondary image, fainter but startlingly consistent with the front-facing figure. The delicate procedure, conducted behind closed doors, exposed fabric details invisible since medieval times, including clearer bloodstains, weave patterns, and that mysterious double imprint of a face. Critics immediately cried foul, accusing the Vatican of tampering with historical evidence. Some researchers argued that removing the backing cloth disturbed centuries of accumulated pollen and dust particles that could have held critical clues about the shroud's journey. British historian David Socks famously called it an irreversible act of vandalism, pointing out that no independent scientists were allowed to document the process or analyze the dislodged material. The Vatican's tight control over the restoration fueled conspiracy theories had they destroyed inconvenient evidence, or worse, altered the shroud itself. Yet restorers insisted their mission was preservation, not deception. The Holland cloth, they revealed, had been sewn with threads that were slowly degrading, risking contamination of the original linen. Infrared scans showed moisture trapped between the layers, creating ideal conditions for mold that could have eaten away at the ancient fibers. By replacing the brittle medieval stitching with neutral, chemically inert fabric, they argued they'd saved the shroud from irreversible decay. "We didn't erase history," explained lead conservator Mechthild Fleury Lemberg. "We stopped history from erasing the shroud." The controversy took a forensic turn when researchers compared pre- and post-restoration photographs. Supporters noted that newly visible details like the cleaner outline of bloodstains on the back actually strengthened the case for authenticity. The hidden reverse image, now unobstructed, displayed anatomical precision impossible for a medieval artist to paint blindly. Even the weave pattern told a story. The original herringbone linen matched 1st century Palestinian textiles, not European medieval ones. What no one anticipated was how the restoration would rewrite the shroud's timeline. Threads from the removed backing cloth were radiocarbon dated as part of an unrelated study, revealing something explosive. Some sewing materials were older than the medieval period the shroud had been carbon dated to. This bombshell suggested the backing might have incorporated fragments of even older fabric, inadvertently supporting claims that the 1988 carbon tests had been skewed by later repairs. Whether by accident or design, the 2002 restoration didn't just expose hidden layers of cloth, it peeled back another layer of mystery. The Vatican's secrecy undoubtedly raised eyebrows, but one thing became undeniable: the tampering revealed more than it concealed. For the first time, scientists could study blood transfer patterns between both sides of the linen, confirming the shroud had once enveloped a three-dimensional form. The faint backside image, now fully visible, defied all known artistic techniques of any era. And perhaps most tellingly, the restoration exposed something no forger would ever include: imperfections. The newly revealed areas showed inconsistencies in fiber discoloration, random scatterings of debris, and asymmetries that screamed of organic origin rather than deliberate craftsmanship. In the end, the controversy distilled to a single, uncomfortable truth: whether preservation or interference, the 2002 intervention forced us to confront how little we truly understand about this enigmatic relic. Every layer removed seems to reveal not answers, but deeper questions woven into the fabric as indelibly as the image itself. One of the most striking connections between the Shroud of Turin and ancient art lies in its eerie resemblance to early Christian iconography, particularly the Pantocrator images that began appearing in Byzantine churches centuries before the shroud surfaced in medieval France. These solemn, almond-eyed portraits of Christ, with their distinctive asymmetrical features, bear an uncanny similarity to the face imprinted on the linen. The most famous example, the 6th century Christ Pantocrator from St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai, shares the same unusual details: a forked beard, a pronounced leftward tilt to the head, a straight nose with a subtle bump, and even a peculiar tuft of hair above the forehead. It's as if the artists were working from the same reference one that predates the shroud's documented history by nearly 800 years. This raises a provocative question: could the shroud have secretly influenced these ancient portraits long before its official appearance in the 1400s? Art historians note that Byzantine iconography didn't evolve gradually. It appeared almost fully formed in the 6th century, abandoning the youthful, beardless depictions of Christ common in earlier Roman art. The sudden shift suggests artists had access to a revered prototype, possibly a relic like the shroud. Some scholars point to the mandilion, a legendary cloth said to bear Christ's miraculous portrait, which vanished from Constantinople around 1204, around the same time the Knights Templar, later linked to the shroud's guardianship, were active in the city. Skeptics argue the similarities are coincidental, that medieval forgers simply copied established artistic conventions. But here's the problem: the shroud's image contains anatomical quirks no artist would invent. The uneven eyebrows, the swollen right cheek, even the crooked nose, these aren't stylistic choices but realistic asymmetries found on an actual human face. More tellingly, Byzantine icons often show Christ with one raised eyebrow, a detail mirrored perfectly on the shroud where post-mortem swelling distorts the forehead. Why would a forger replicate such subtle, unflattering traits when conventional art idealized its subjects? The plot thickens when you examine specific markings. The Pantocrator's right eye appears slightly larger, a feature matching the shroud's image, where the right orbital cavity is distended, possibly from trauma. Even the faint striations across the forehead on early icons align with the scourge marks visible on the linen. These aren't generic Christ-like features, they're forensic-level matches. If the shroud is a medieval forgery, it's one that somehow predicted or remembered artistic details from half a millennium earlier. Perhaps the most compelling evidence lies in what these icons omit. None depict Christ with nails through the palms, despite it being a medieval artistic trope. Instead, they subtly hint at wrist wounds exactly where the shroud's bloodstains appear, reflecting the anatomical reality of crucifixion. This anomaly suggests artists weren't following tradition but referencing something closer to physical evidence. Whether the shroud itself or a now-lost copy, these icons seem to whisper of a tangible source, one that knew truths about Christ's appearance and suffering long before science confirmed them. The connection challenges both believers and skeptics. If the shroud inspired these ancient portraits, its origins stretch far beyond medieval Europe. But if it's a later creation, its alignment with Byzantine art becomes an inexplicable coincidence, one that threads faith, history, and artistry into a tapestry with no clear beginning or end. Among the more colorful theories surrounding the Shroud of Turin is the claim that Leonardo da Vinci, the Renaissance genius behind the Mona Lisa, engineered the entire relic as an elaborate hoax using early photographic techniques. Proponents of this idea suggest he used a camera obscura, a primitive projection device, to transfer an image onto linen, perhaps even superimposing his own face onto the cloth. It's a tantalizing notion, blending art history with conspiracy, but there's one glaring problem. Leonardo wasn't born until 1452, nearly a full century after the shroud first appeared in historical records. The linen was already well documented across Europe by the time he picked up a paintbrush. Beyond the timeline mismatch, the technical hurdles make this theory collapse under scrutiny. A camera obscura projects fleeting images onto surfaces, not permanent stains. Even if Leonardo had somehow developed a way to fix such an image centuries before photography's invention, the shroud's unique properties defy replication by Renaissance tools. The image isn't just a surface-level stain. It penetrates less than a single micron deep into the topmost fibers with no directionality or brush strokes. Modern experiments show that even advanced chemical reactions struggle to mimic this effect, let alone a 15th century artist working with candlelight and basic chemicals. Then there's the matter of the bloodstains. The shroud's blood flows match the wounds of crucifixion with forensic precision, something Leonardo, for all his anatomical studies, couldn't have faked without understanding capillary action and post-mortem clotting, concepts unknown in his era. The blood also contains traces of bilirubin, a compound elevated in torture victims, a detail no Renaissance scientist could have fabricated. Even if Leonardo had access to real blood, preserving its biochemical markers over centuries would have required impossible foresight. Perhaps the most damning evidence against the Da Vinci theory lies in the shroud's three-dimensional encoding. The image behaves like a depth map, with shading variations corresponding exactly to the distance between cloth and body, a feature only visible through 20th century imaging technology. Leonardo had no concept of three-dimensional data projection. His anatomical drawings, while groundbreaking, operated in a flat, two-dimensional plane. The idea that he somehow embedded spatial information into linen borders on science fiction. While the Da Vinci hoax theory makes for entertaining speculation, it crumbles under historical and scientific scrutiny. The shroud's mysteries run far deeper than Renaissance ingenuity, rooted instead in questions that continue to challenge our understanding of art, science, and perhaps even the divine. Rather than reducing the relic to a masterful forgery, its contradictions invite us to reconsider what we think we know about the boundaries of human achievement. In 2020, a team of scientists turned their X-ray beams toward the Shroud of Turin, hoping to uncover what centuries of scrutiny had failed to reveal. What they found wasn't just unusual, it was unprecedented. The faint image, long debated as either a medieval painting or a miraculous imprint, contained something no one expected: nanocrystalline structures embedded within the linen fibers. These weren't pigments, stains, or any known byproduct of aging. Under high-resolution X-ray diffraction, the fibers showed a peculiar form of cellulose oxidation, a chemical transformation so precise and uniform that it defied every conventional explanation. The implications are staggering. Normal paint, whether iron-based or organic, leaves behind clumps of pigment or binder residues. Medieval artists had no way to manipulate materials on a nanoscale, let alone create crystalline formations invisible to the naked eye. Even more baffling, the oxidation penetrates only the topmost fibers less than a human hair's width deep without bleeding into adjacent threads. Modern science struggles to replicate this effect even with lasers or plasma bursts. It's as if the image was somehow etched onto the cloth by an energy source that selectively altered the molecular structure of the linen without scorching or tearing it. Leading material scientists have proposed a radical theory. The image might be the result of a short, intense burst of electromagnetic energy, something akin to a controlled flash of vacuum ultraviolet radiation. This wouldn't just explain the nanocrystalline formations, it could account for the image's three-dimensional precision, as the energy would interact with the cloth based on its distance from the body. Imagine a momentary surge so powerful it imprinted spatial data onto the fibers, yet so brief it left no signs of burning. The closest parallel, modern industrial processes that use directed energy beams to modify surface materials technology that didn't exist until the 21st century. Skeptics counter that environmental factors like prolonged exposure to heat or humidity could theoretically degrade cellulose over time. But here's the catch: natural degradation isn't this selective. It doesn't create perfect facial contours or encode depth information, and it certainly doesn't leave behind nanocrystalline patterns indistinguishable from those produced in lab-controlled radiation experiments. Even if the shroud had been exposed to extreme conditions like the 1532 fire, the damage would be random and widespread, not confined to a photorealistic human figure. The most compelling detail lies in what the X-rays didn't find. If the image were painted, even with the most advanced medieval techniques, there would be traces of foreign elements, metal oxides, plant-based dyes, or protein binders. Instead, the chemistry is purely linen transformed at the molecular level. It's as though the image isn't something added to the cloth, but something drawn from it, a fundamental alteration of its very structure. What could have caused such a phenomenon? Some researchers point to ancient texts describing the resurrection as accompanied by dazzling light. Others speculate about unknown forms of energy or even quantum-level interactions beyond our current understanding. Whatever the source, one thing is certain: the shroud's image isn't just a mystery of history or art, it's a puzzle written in the language of advanced material science, waiting for a key we haven't yet discovered. The more we learn, the clearer it becomes that this ancient linen challenges not just our past, but the limits of our present knowledge. The Shroud of Turin becomes even more perplexing when examined through the lens of first-century Jewish burial customs. Unlike medieval Christian traditions, where bodies were often wrapped tightly in winding sheets with limbs bound straight, Jewish practice in ancient Judea involved a careful, ritualistic process. The deceased would first be washed, then anointed with fragrant spices like myrrh and aloes before being loosely covered in linen cloths. The shroud's condition aligns uncannily with these practices. Its stains suggest a body was placed on one half of the linen while the other was draped over the top, creating a sandwich-like enclosure rather than a constrictive bind. This matches archaeological evidence from Jerusalem tombs, where shrouds were designed to allow the body to rest naturally, without the rigid posturing seen in later Christian burials. One of the most telling details is the presence of unwashed bloodstains. Jewish law required purification before burial, yet the shroud clearly shows dried blood around the wounds, contradicting standard practice unless the body was never cleansed. This anomaly aligns with the Gospel's account of Jesus being hastily entombed before the Sabbath, leaving no time for traditional preparations. even the arrangement of spices presents a compelling clue. Researchers have detected traces of aromatic compounds like aloes and myrrh embedded in the fibers, substances specifically mentioned in the New Testament as being brought by Nicodemus for Jesus' burial. A medieval forger unfamiliar with Jewish customs would have no reason to include such minute, culturally specific details. Now consider how starkly this contrasts with medieval Christian burial traditions. By the 14th century, European practices had evolved dramatically. Bodies were typically sewn into shrouds or even wrapped in waxed cloth for preservation, with limbs deliberately arranged in symbolic postures. Embalming, though rare, sometimes involved evisceration, a far cry from the respectful anointing of the 1st century. If a medieval artist had fabricated the shroud, they likely would have depicted these familiar practices rather than replicating obscure Judean rituals. The absence of any anachronistic Christian elements, no crossed arms, no burial shrouds tied at the head and feet, speaks volumes. Perhaps the most damning evidence against the forgery theory lies in the shroud's folding pattern. Jewish burial cloths were often folded lengthwise like the shroud, whereas medieval Christians preferred wrapping the body in multiple pieces of cloth. The Turin linen shows no signs of having been cut or torn to fit European customs, as might be expected if it were a later fabrication. Even the way the bloodstains transfer between layers suggests a single, continuous piece of fabric consistent with the sinden or large sheet described in the Gospels. The shroud doesn't just passively align with ancient traditions, it actively contradicts medieval ones. From the untreated blood to the absence of European burial motifs, every forensic and textile detail points to an origin far removed from 14th century France. Whether divine or historical, this relic carries the fingerprints of a time and place no medieval forger could have fully comprehended, let alone replicated with such precision. In 1978, a team of top-tier scientists from NASA, Los Alamos, and other prestigious institutions embarked on what would become the most exhaustive scientific study of the Shroud of Turin ever conducted. Known as the Shroud of Turin Research Project, or STURP, this group of physicists, chemists, and forensic experts spent 120 straight hours scrutinizing the relic under every form of light, from ultraviolet to infrared, and collecting samples smaller than postage stamps. What's fascinating is that most of these researchers began their work as outright skeptics, convinced they'd quickly debunk the shroud as a medieval forgery. Instead, they walked away baffled, their skepticism transformed into something far more intriguing, a genuine scientific mystery. The team's findings turned conventional wisdom on its head. Using advanced spectroscopy and microscopy, they confirmed the shroud's bloodstains were real human blood, type AB, with traces of bilirubin consistent with extreme trauma. More startlingly, they found no evidence of pigments, brushstrokes, or any artistic medium that could explain the image. The coloration wasn't painted or dyed, it was a superficial alteration of the linen's topmost fibers, less than a micron deep, with no directionality to suggest human application. One STURP member, physicist John Jackson, described it as like a scorch but without the heat. The image behaved optically like a photographic negative, yet it encoded three-dimensional data, something no known medieval technique could achieve. Despite their thoroughness, the team hit a wall when it came to explaining how the image formed. Hypotheses ranged from chemical reactions with burial spices to brief bursts of radiant energy, but none fully accounted for the shroud's unique properties. Even attempts to replicate the effect in labs, using everything from lasers to acidic vapors, fell short of matching the relic's precision. The STURP report's conclusion was as honest as it was frustrating. The answer lies beyond the current capabilities of science. What makes the STURP investigation so pivotal isn't just the absence of evidence for forgery, it's the startling realization that the shroud defies categorization. This wasn't a group of theologians or relic enthusiasts. These were hard-nosed scientists who expected to dismantle the mystery with cold, empirical data. Instead, they left with more questions than answers, forced to confront the possibility that the shroud represents something science hasn't yet learned to measure. Their work didn't prove divinity, but it did something equally remarkable. It stripped away easy explanations, leaving behind a riddle that continues to challenge the boundaries of history, art, and physics. The Sturp study didn't solve the shroud, it deepened its enigma. The most tantalizing gap in the Shroud of Turin's history spans over 1,300 years, from the crucifixion around 33 AD to its sudden appearance in 1354 France. Where was it during those missing centuries? One compelling theory traces it to the ancient city of Edessa, modern-day Urfa in Turkey. Historical accounts describe a sacred cloth called the mandilion, said to bear the miraculous imprint of Christ's face. The mandilion, reportedly gifted by Jesus himself to King Abgar of Edessa, was venerated for centuries before mysteriously vanishing during the Persian conquest in the 6th century. Strikingly, early descriptions of this relic mention it being folded, showing only the face, much like the shroud's image would appear if doubled over repeatedly. Could the mandilion have been the shroud, concealed to protect its full, controversial depiction of crucifixion wounds? Another thread leads to Constantinople. In 944, the mandilion was transferred to the Byzantine capital, where it was stored in the imperial palace's pharaoh's chapel alongside other revered relics. Documents from the 12th century describe a sindon, a full-body burial cloth kept in the same chapel, suggesting the folded mandilion might have been displayed differently over time. Then, in 1204, disaster struck. Crusaders sacked Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade, looting treasures indiscriminately. Historical records mention French knights seizing sacred textiles, including a cloth bearing the figure of a man. Could this be the moment the shroud entered European hands, eventually passing to Geoffroy de Charny a century later? Not everyone agrees. Some scholars argue the Edessa theory relies on speculative leaps, noting that no contemporary accounts explicitly describe the mandilion as a burial shroud. Others point to the image of Camuliana, another famed Byzantine relic, as a potential candidate for the stolen cloth, but here's where the trail grows colder. Between 1204 and 1354, the historical record falls silent. Was the shroud hidden by the Knights Templar, rumored to guard clandestine relics? Did it travel through monastic networks kept secret to avoid accusations of heresy? The absence of documentation frustrates researchers, yet it also fits a pattern. Many early Christian artifacts were deliberately concealed during periods of persecution or upheaval. The most provocative clue might lie in art. Byzantine icons from the 6th century onward depict Christ with startling consistency. An asymmetrical face, a forked beard, and a peculiar tuft of hair above the forehead, details eerily matching the shroud's image. If these artists were referencing the mandilion, and the mandilion was the folded shroud, it would explain why the iconography aligns so precisely with the linen's hidden details. Yet without a smoking gun, a first-hand account, or archaeological find, the missing years remain a canvas for theories, each adding another layer to the shroud's enduring enigma. Whether hidden in plain sight or spirited across continents, its journey through the shadows of history only deepens the mystery of how and why it re-emerged in medieval Europe, demanding questions we still can't fully answer. Despite decades of cutting-edge experiments, modern science still can't replicate the Shroud of Turin's baffling properties with complete accuracy. In 2019, Italian researchers at the National Agency for New Technologies attempted what seemed like a breakthrough using excimer lasers to scorch linen fibers at microscopic depths. The pulsed ultraviolet light created a faint, straw-yellow discoloration superficially resembling the shroud's image. But while the laser achieved similar surface-level effects, it failed spectacularly at matching the relic's finer details. The test images lacked three-dimensional encoding, no gradual shading to indicate facial contours, and the chemical composition differed entirely. Instead of cellulose oxidation, the laser produced carbonized marks more akin to burning, a telltale sign of modern intervention absent from the ancient linen. Another ambitious attempt came from forensic artist Luigi Garlascelli in 2011. His team wrapped a volunteer in linen coated with acid and pigment, then heated the fabric to create a bas-relief transfer. At first glance, the result looked convincing until placed under microscopic scrutiny. The pigment penetrated too deeply into the fibers, lacking the shroud's ethereal superficiality. Worse, the bloodstains appeared unnaturally flat, missing the serum halos and capillary patterns found on the original. Garlascelli's method also couldn't explain the shroud's photographic negative properties. His creation looked equally coherent whether viewed normally or as a negative, unlike the Turin linen's eerily detailed reverse image. Perhaps the most revealing failures involve radiation experiments. A 2011 study published in Applied Optics tested proton beams on linen, theorizing that charged particles could create the shroud's unique superficial image. While the proton treatment altered surface fibers without burning them, the resulting marks lacked the relic's resolution and depth mapping. The beam couldn't recreate nuanced features like the subtle asymmetry of Christ's face or the accurate wound placements. Even more damning radiation techniques leave behind detectable isotopes, none of which appear in the shroud's chemical profile. These persistent shortcomings highlight an uncomfortable truth for skeptics: the shroud's image formation requires simultaneous mastery of optics, chemistry, and anatomy that exceeds even 21st century capabilities. Modern replicas either capture the superficial look but miss the forensic details, or nail the blood chemistry while failing the image analysis. Not a single attempt has united all the shroud's anomalies: the lack of pigments, the three-dimensional data encoding, the photographic negative properties, and the accurate blood trauma markers. Each failed experiment doesn't just deepen the mystery, it quietly reinforces how extraordinary the original relic truly is, standing defiantly outside any known artistic or scientific framework from either the medieval or modern world. The most humbling realization emerges when comparing these efforts. While contemporary techniques can mimic isolated aspects of the shroud, none achieve the synthesis of elements found on the original. It's as if the linen's creator, whether divine or human, understood concepts we're still grappling with today. How to project a perfect three-dimensional likeness onto fabric without contact, how to encode physiological responses invisible to the naked eye, how to leave blood chemistry undisturbed for centuries. Every replication attempt, no matter how advanced, ends up revealing more about our own limitations than about the shroud's origins. In the quiet laboratories where scientists still puzzle over this ancient textile, one question lingers unanswered: if we can't recreate it now with all our technology, how could anyone have faked it 600 years ago? The Vatican has long walked a careful line when it comes to the Shroud of Turin, venerating it as a powerful symbol of Christ's passion, while stopping short of declaring it an authentic relic. For centuries, popes have referred to it as an icon rather than a verified artifact, a distinction that acknowledges its spiritual resonance without wading into scientific debates. This delicate balance reflects a deeper truth. The shroud exists in a rare space where faith and empirical inquiry intersect, each asking different questions but drawn to the same enigmatic object. Believers see in its bloodstains and haunting image a tangible connection to the Gospel's crucifixion narrative, while scientists grapple with inexplicable properties that resist categorization. The result is a paradox, an object of devotion that also serves as a laboratory for cutting-edge research. What makes this tension so compelling is how the shroud seems to speak both languages simultaneously. To the faithful, its wounds align unmistakably with biblical accounts: the crown of thorns, the scourge marks, the pierced side. These aren't abstract symbols but visceral details that echo scripture verse by verse. Yet for researchers, those same features become forensic puzzles. The blood's chemical composition, the absence of pigments, the three-dimensional encoding, each detail invites scrutiny not as proof of divinity, but as a scientific anomaly demanding explanation. The shroud doesn't just inspire reverence, it challenges our understanding of history, chemistry, and even physics. This duality has led to some remarkable collaborations. During the 1978 Stirp investigation, teams of devout Christians and secular scientists worked side by side, united not by shared beliefs but by shared curiosity. A physicist, might analyze light reflectance patterns, while a Franciscan friar documented stitch patterns from first-century textiles, both approaches yielding insights the other couldn't reach alone. Even today, the Vatican grants limited access to researchers, recognizing that scientific study needn't diminish the shroud's spiritual significance. Critics argue this balancing act is merely strategic, a way to maintain the shroud's allure while avoiding definitive claims that could backfire, but there's another way to see it. The Vatican's stance acknowledges a profound reality. Some mysteries resist resolution, not because of insufficient evidence, but because they exist at the edges of human understanding. Whether viewed through the lens of faith or science, the shroud refuses to fit neatly into any framework. It's this very elusiveness that keeps drawing us back, inviting us to sit with questions that may never have final answers. For believers, the shroud's power lies not in its authentication, but in its ability to inspire reflection on suffering, sacrifice, and resurrection. For scientists, its value stems from the way it pushes technological boundaries, forcing us to reconsider what we know about ancient materials and image formation. These perspectives aren't mutually exclusive, they're complementary facets of the same enduring mystery. The shroud doesn't demand that we choose between faith and reason. Instead, it asks us to hold both in tension, reminding us that some truths, whether spiritual or scientific, are too vast to be contained by a single worldview. In a polarized age, perhaps that's its most unexpected gift, a shared space where wonder thrives and certainty takes a backseat to awe. After centuries of scrutiny, the Shroud of Turin remains an enigma wrapped in fragile linen, its mysteries only deepening with each new discovery. We've unraveled bloodstains that match ancient crucifixion practices, decoded three-dimensional data hidden in its fibers, and even glimpsed a faint secondary image on its backside. Yet the central question lingers, like the ghostly figure on the cloth itself. How was this image created? Modern science, with its lasers and nanocrystalline analyses, still can't reproduce the shroud's exact combination of photographic negative properties, forensic precision, and molecular-level oxidation. Every attempted explanation, medieval artistry, chemical reactions, even radiation bursts, falls short, leaving us with a relic that defies categorization. Consider the paradox at the heart of this mystery. If the shroud is a medieval forgery, it's one that somehow encoded medical knowledge centuries ahead of its time, from the bilirubin in the blood to the precise angle of the spear wound. Yet if it's genuine, we're faced with an even more unsettling possibility, that its image formed through means beyond our current understanding of physics or history. The shroud doesn't just challenge our assumptions about the past, it nudges us toward questions we're still learning to ask. What energy source could alter linen fibers so delicately without scorching them? How could a first-century burial cloth survive fires, wars, and the passage of time with its secrets intact? This isn't just a debate about authenticity, it's a mirror reflecting the limits of human knowledge. For skeptics, the shroud represents the ultimate cold case, an unsolved puzzle begging for a breakthrough. For believers, it's a tangible whisper of something transcendent, but perhaps both perspectives miss the bigger picture. Whether divine or inexplicably human, the shroud forces us to confront how much we still don't understand about our world. Its very existence is a challenge to science, to faith, and to the stories we tell ourselves about history. So where does that leave us, with more questions than answers? If the shroud isn't a miracle, what extraordinary confluence of events could have produced it? A forgotten technology, a natural phenomenon we've yet to identify. Or something even more extraordinary, the truth may lie beyond our current grasp, waiting for future generations to uncover. Until then, the shroud remains, a silent witness to an event that reshaped history, its secrets woven into threads no one has yet fully unraveled. What do you think created this impossible image? Share your theories below, because some mysteries are too compelling to face alone.